mediums. A ton of 10 frame mediums, copper hive tops. I have medium nooks like that are wooden. And I'm kind of downsizing a little bit. So if you want any of that, find me afterwards. Let's see. And then you want me to launch into all the things? All right. All right, sounds good. Let me share my screen and then I'll introduce myself. Let's see. Maybe. That. All right, there we go. All right, well, hello everyone. My name is Kendal Sager, and tonight I'm going to be talking about spring stuff. So I think is anyone in here consider themselves kind of like a newbie just getting started? Okay, good amount of newbies. Anyone like intermediate bee? Some intermediate bees, advanced bees. Some advanced. All right, so the whole mix. So I'm going to try to do a whole mix of things. So I'll start with, yes, that's right. Some be curious. That's right. Well, this is actually good for that too, because I'm going to start with some of the basics of what you would identify in a hive inspection, and then go through what am I usually doing in a spring inspection. And then for the more intermediate crowd of swarm prevention. So if you've already got bees, it's like, that's what I'm doing in spring, is preventing swarms, and specifically usually doing that through splits. So I'll go through one method of doing a split specifically for swarm prevention, but there's a few different ways to skin that cat. So without further ado, see if my clicker works. Oh, am I all the way at the end? I think I am. How am I at the end? I know. I'm sure there's a way to restart this. Let's see. Boop. All right, there we go. I was all the way at the end. All right, so first of all, a little bit about me. I've always been into bugs and critters, but as a first grader, I got to go on a farm field trip with my school to Hidden Villa, and that really sparked everything. I came home from that and was like, I am going to be a farmer one day. And of course, living in the Bay Area, my parents were like, oh God, please don't do that. Like you like computers is what you like. So I worked in tech for a very long time, but I still wanted to be a farmer. So in 2010, I took my first beekeeping class and bought bees. So I've been a beekeeper for a little over 13 years now. And I've gone through the California Master Beekeeper program. So I'm a certified California Master Beekeeper now. I kept bees in the Bay Area for about 10-ish years. And now I moved to San Diego. And that is, I'm like a beginner again. There's different bees down there. So beekeeping in San Diego is totally different. So it's very interesting to keep bees in a different part of the state. Mostly what I do now, so I'm no longer in tech. Mostly what I do is children's education. So I take observation hives into school classrooms, connected with STEAM curriculum. So about insect anatomy, social structure of beehives and organisms that help them survive. We even incorporate some social emotional learning. So we actually approach fear and anxiety through the lens of beekeeping, which I think that's the most interesting class. I started that business in 2015, and last year we taught just under 7,000 students. So that's about 325 classrooms throughout the state of California. So that's what I do full time now. Thank you. I'm impressed. So the farm is mostly focused on bees. So we've kind of gone all into that, but we do also have chickens. I've done egg hatch in a few classrooms. We also do native pollinators and like monarchs and native bees as well. So without further ado, so that's why I'm talking to you. I do a lot of bee education. So without further ado, what we're talking about today. So I'll start with the basics. And if you do have a question throughout, because I know I go a million miles a minute, throw up a hand. It's all good. Ask a question. So the basics that I'll start with is what's in the hive? What could I possibly see during this inspection? Just so we know when I'm talking about how to do an inspection, what we're actually looking for. So there's adult bees in your hive, which are the 3 castes, worker, queen, and drone, which I'll go through. There's brood in the hive. So these are the babies. So it could be eggs, larvae that's open, or pupa that are capped. So capped brood would be in their cocoons. And then there's food. So there could be nectar, bee bread, which is a mixture of pollen and nectar, or there could be capped honey ready to go. So these are kind of the main things basic things that you would identify inside of the hive. So for the castes of bees, we've got the 3 castes here. So we've got worker, drone, queen. The queen in the beehive, so she is the largest bee that you've got in there, but in a long fashion. So if you're looking at the 3 of them together, a lot of people see drones and they're like, I have spotted the queen, hooray. But he's kind of the chunky linebacker compared to this queen who's long and elegant. So it's really her abdomen that's longer. And that's because she could lay up to 2,000 eggs a day. So she is a busy layer. There's only one of her in the entire beehive. She could live up to 5 years. I've never seen one. Has anyone ever seen one 5 years old? I've seen like a 3-year-old queen. That's like the ancient most queen that I've seen. Then there's the workers. This is the vast majority of the bees that you'll see in your hive, up to about 60,000 of them. So this one has a little bit of pollen in her pollen basket. Queen doesn't have the pollen basket. So they'll have pollen, they're collecting nectar, they're taking care of the babies, they're controlling the temperature of the hive, they keep the hive clean, they're doing all the chores. And they're all ladies too, so all female. And then there are the drones. These are the males, which you might be seeing already in some of your established hives, but there's kind of an up and down with males. They are not always present. So if you have small hives right now, my small hives, no males, because these guys are for breeding purposes only. That is their one job in life, is to find a brand new queen and mate with her, and that is it. So typically there can be up to about 200 of them in a hive, and it peaks in spring. And when the dearth hits, so when like all the nectar dries up in fall here, I notice that a lot of my drones get chucked out. So we'll go through the winter with no boys, and then the queen, who can choose if she wants to lay a male or a female egg, will start laying males again when the resources increase. So like when all this rain is hitting and causing wildflowers to bloom. So those are the 3 castes of adult bees that you might see and when you might see them in your hive. This is an example of some brood that you might see. So this has some capped brood in here. So these little cappings are the pupa phase. So they are about to hatch into adult worker bees. These squishy white bits here, oh, that's much better. So these squishy looking things in here, those are larvae, so which we might also refer to as open brood. And then these guys here, little tiny white lines, which are smaller than a grain of rice. So a zoom in right there, those are the eggs. So an egg is an egg for about 3 days. So that's how long you might see eggs. Open larva is open for worker bees about 5 to 6 days, and then it's capped for about 12 days. So that's kind of the distribution of the brood that you might see in there. And then just showing you the difference between resources and babies. This here is all capped brood. This is capped honey. So you can kind of see the translucent honey versus the more opaque, papery coverings of the capped brood. So those are the 2 differences between capped things that you might see in there. Then this is the difference between nectar, so it's open, and honey. You can have honey while it's still open. A good way to check is just take your frame and like fling it really fast at the hive. And if watery droplets go, it's nectar. And if it stays in, it's probably pretty close to honey, but You're probably not harvesting stuff like this unless you have a refractometer, which measures the water content in there, because you don't want to be harvesting nectar. But this is a frame that you might harvest. So this is capped honey that you might find in there. And then this is what the bee bread looks like. I love this picture of the bee bread. A lot of the pollen that I see come in is like, it's a majority yellow, but you can see some purples in here. Echium actually produces a purple honey, so those big purple spears of flowers. Red, I've noticed some poppies make a red or an orange. The hot Cheeto red, I've noticed, comes from rock purslane. So it's that succulent with that hot pink flower at the top, actually has a bright red pollen. Some of the pollen's not represented here. I know eucalyptus has more of a white color. And then date palms also have a white color. Rosemary is kind of a greenish white. So you can really get a wide spectrum. So honestly, the more diversity you see in this, it actually contributes to the health of the bees. So they actually want a diversity of pollen too. And when you see it, this bright, vibrant color, that is nice and fresh. I've noticed that a lot of bees in this area tend to actually even get pollen bound, which means like they've got pollen everywhere. And when this stuff gets old, it gets this kind of like orangey, brown, greasy color. It can get black. It can mold if there's too much moisture. So this is actually like bread. Like it'll go bad. Yeah. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, this is very fresh. I have seen some of the older ones, because especially in that bottom box after the winter, I've noticed they do tend to abandon it after a little while. So it might preserve it, but I feel like they tend to want the fresh stuff over the stuff that's been preserved. So like we might too. So let's see. So I think those are the resources that we might find. So that's just an identification of what we might find. So in terms of, okay, well, what do I do with all that information? In February and March, the bees should be bringing in lots of pollen and nectar, and they're ramping up for spring. This year, maybe that's happening a little bit later because there's been so much wet. But the bees, I have noticed them ramping up, so they are definitely trying to build up. Right now, they might be starting drone production depending on how healthy they are. Okay, so I've seen some of the advanced people in here saying there's drones. I saw some drones on the bees that I keep on the roof of the Redwood City Library today. So they're starting that drone production, and they might even start swarming. So has anyone caught a swarm yet this year? Not yet. So, okay. So swarms have started already. Yeah, they trickle through, but swarm season should be starting any moment.
21 classmates and teachers in elementary school.
And then in terms of what I am doing, so since the bees are ramping up, I really want to make sure they have space. So I'd say if you're a newbie, you might check once a week. Every time you do open the hive, it kind of sets them back a little bit. So as a more experienced beekeeper, I tend to keep it every 2 weeks, but you don't want to let it go too far because they can raise a queen in as little as 16 days. So they can swarm pretty quickly if they run out of space, if the weather's right. I feel like the weather's pretty up and down right now, but I'd rather get eyes on them when the sun is out while I can than leave them too long. And then as soon as the sun comes out, they all swarm. So making sure they have a little extra space right now is better. So doing some swarm prevention and maybe even some splitting. So in April and May, even more so, like they should be, I'm hoping that it dries out by April, and then they should be growing like crazy. So that's really when I want to be inspecting them at least every 2 weeks to make sure they have space. So in terms of my spring inspection objectives, I usually, in general, try to establish that there's a queen in there, that they have space in there, that they have resources, which is kind of lower on my priority list for spring. Usually in fall, it's like, are they going to starve? But now it's like, Let's make sure they have some pollen and stuff in there, maybe for my weaker colonies. So that shouldn't be a problem in spring unless you have a problem in your hive. And then their general health, which again, usually spring bees are in pretty good health if they've made it into April. So in checking for a queen, for our newbies, there's a queen up here that you could try to spot. Oh, you've already spotted it, Peter. So that was beginner level. So there is a queen here. You can see her. Some of the identifying things are, one, she's got a longer abdomen. This is an Italian queen, so she's nice and golden. Other queen, I have a lot of mixed breed queens up here that are a little darker in the abdomen, makes them a lot harder to see. But she also has a more hairless thorax. So that's the other difference between her and the other bees, is she's got this nice shiny thorax. Yeah, so in this one, she is also present, but she's doing what she does like most of the time. She's laying an egg. So her abdomen is not visible. It makes her much more difficult to find. Boop, there she is. So this is kind of tricky. And as your hive gets larger and larger, like if I'm dealing with a nook that's only 5 frames, like a little box in front of me here, I can usually find the queen. But if I have 5 boxes tall, like there's 50 frames in here, I am not hunting through every frame to find the queen. I do not do that. So we're using the bee math that I mentioned a little bit before, is that most of the babies in here are workers, which means they're eggs for 3 days, a larva for 5 or 6, capped for about 12, and then they come out as a full-size bee. So if I see babies, which are stationary, which is a lot easier to find, then I can kind of calculate, is my queen around? So if I see capped brood, I know at least in the last like 9 days, in order for this to be capped, the queen at least laid this egg 9 days ago, and now it's capped. So the queen was around maybe in the last 9 to 21 days. If I see larva, she's definitely been around in the last like 6 or so days, like 3 to 9 days. And if I'm lucky enough to spot a whole sheet of eggs, which as a newbie, you might see like, oh, this looks totally blank. So try to take it into the sunlight, put the sun behind your back, and just kind of tip it. Like I feel like that angling so that you're hitting the sun right at the bottom, you can sometimes see those little white lines. And practice makes perfect with that. So always try. If you've got extra time, try looking for eggs, because if you see eggs, I'm like, queen is fine. She was here in the last 3 days. So seeing all those 3 stages is really helpful. Yeah. Yes, they can. So you might see something where you've got like a ring of capped brood and what looks like empty in the center. And it's possible that that's still empty and that they're cleaning it out. But she can start backfilling, especially if she doesn't have space elsewhere. She can then start spiraling from that center as the outer ring is still emerging. But in general, like if she's got space like this, she's going to take it up. When you start seeing eggs here and there, it can either be an indication of like she's got nowhere else to lay, so she might be jam-packed in there. Or if you see these spotty eggs all over the place, that can be an indication that there's something wrong with her. So this is like beautiful textbook frame of eggs that you would hopefully see. Oh, yep, sorry. I will talk into this. Yes. So repeat. Yeah. So what do you do with an ancient queen or a queen that's failing or that she's not gone? So if she has gone away on her own, it's in the bee's best interest to survive and to make a new queen. So if she is not up to their standards, which is what I see, by the time they hit 3, they've either swarmed or they've superseded. So when they supersede, they're just like, this lady's too old. Let's get a new one. And then they pick one of her daughters to supersede her. So they will start raising queens before she's gone. And in an emergency case, like if she's been squished or something like that, you will see them take any young larva, so one that's just hatched, has still been eating royal jelly, they will start pumping a few of those larvae full of royal jelly as soon as they notice the queen is gone, and they will make a new queen. So if you see cells that look like peanuts in there, I usually like step away. I'm like, leave them alone. They're raising queens, or I'll show you what else to do if they're swarming. So they will usually do that. I find that in most cases, I wouldn't need to intervene, but you could purchase a queen to put a queen in. But I find the safest thing for beginners to do is, if you are unsure whether your queen exists in there or not, if you find a mentor in here that can help you find eggs in some other colony, or can donate a frame of eggs or super young larvae, pop that in your hive. If there is a queen, they will raise that just like workers. If there is no queen, they will immediately start queen rearing. So they'll start turning those into queens. So that's the best, I think, safe option, rather than spending $60 on a queen to throw in there to immediately get murdered because there's some other queen in there, is just put the babies in. Yes. Exactly, because like it is going to be swarming season, so you might be able to find a frame with queen cells. So again, being connected in with this group, popping in on the Google group and saying, I need help, someone might be able to help you straight away. Yeah. Eggs? Well, Elizabeth here, she has mailed me eggs in the mail and they hatched. So they have to come pretty quickly. So if they come they have to be fed pretty immediately after they hatch, but the eggs are actually pretty durable through the US postal system. So so eggs are okay. They mail chicken eggs too, so why not bee eggs? So that works. The larva, I'd say best practice is to get it in as soon as you can. Like, I wouldn't take them out of the hive in the morning and then wait until the afternoon. I would be like as fast as you possibly can transport them. And I think with open larvae, keeping them not like blasting in the sun, but not in a drafty area, and even covering with a wet or damp cloth so that they don't dry out, is a best transport practice. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, wow. Okay, so Allah's had him out for a few hours. Yeah, because I usually keep them out for upwards of an hour while grafting. Yeah. So I would still, but the shorter the better, because the bees know how to take care of them. So yeah, and you don't want them to dry out. So that's why with the wet towel, if it's going to be any length of time. So usually when I'm doing it, I've got multiple hives, but I totally get that you might not have a whole bank of hives to work with. All right, I'll keep going for a minute. Let's see. So looking for eggs. Here's the eggs. So this is the establishment of the queen. So we've seen all stages of brood. So hooray, I don't need to find the queen because she's been around to make all these babies. So when I'm checking for space in my hive, which is like another huge spring objective, is make sure there is space for these bees to grow, because that's what they want to do right now. These bees right here, so if I start like counting frames that they're on, it kind of looks like they're maybe half occupying this frame. So I'll say 1 to be generous, 2, 3, 4, 4.5. So they're taking up 4.5 of 10 frames. Depending on what's in here, so if we said this is empty open space, which like in this box, I'd say this is empty open space. So this is drawn comb. It's completely empty, ready to go. This is like gold for them. This is great space. If all of that is honey, they have nowhere to grow. So they will need some open space like this. So it's really dependent whether these bees need space of what's in the other frames. So if they're surrounded by empty drawn frames, these bees are fine. I'd probably leave them for a good 2 weeks before I pop them open again and say, do you guys want another box? So if in a few weeks Oh yeah, so and here's a little diagram of what I thought might be inside. So if they have like open brood eggs, they have a little nectar and bee bread. A hive of that size, I might be a little concerned about resources. So I would check these bees if they had resources, if they're struggling a little bit. But those bees will just pretend they do. Yes. Bee bread. So that was the colorful comb that I showed. Yeah, so that's the bee bread. So the nectar looks like a liquid, a nice shiny liquid that's in there. And then the bee bread looks like often a yellowish, could be kind of brownish, but could be multicolored like red, orange, white. So the other thing, let's see. That's the one I wanted to show. So this hive probably needs space. So these bees are taking up, maybe they're not taking up this frame, but they're taking up like 90% of this box. So they are covering all this space. So I usually in the springtime, depending on what the rain pattern looks like, I would probably add space on my bees if they were taking up 7 of the 10 frames, just because I don't know the next time it's going to be like a break in the weather. And if I, at the 2-week mark, looks like 2 weeks of rain, then I'm going to be in some trouble if I've left those bees for a month. So I err on the side of too much space in the springtime. So these bees, going back a minute, yes. I might be in trouble in that the next time it's like, and especially for those of us who work 9 to 5, like I only have the weekends. If I'm waiting till a nice sunny weekend day, those bees might swarm because it's been a month. So that's trouble for the spring for me. So is that the bees are going to outgrow that space and be like, see ya, and it's going to be way too late for me. So especially while we have this like rain pattern, I would hop in there on the earlier side of things when you can, or err on the side of more space in case you can't get in there. So that's what I mean. So those bees, oh yeah. Yes, everybody has to worry about their new bees swarming, in my opinion. So do new beekeepers have to worry about their bees swarming? Any bee will swarm if they are out of space. So typically, like with the new bees, like you've got a lot of stuff. You might even have more time because I'm like a longtime beekeeper. So I have a lot of drawn comb. So I can put this in my hive and the bees don't have to make all of this wax. So if I'm a brand new beekeeper, I don't have that. I have foundation and that's it. So the bees have to build their house before they start utilizing it. So they have to consume a lot of nectar in order to produce wax and build that comb. So they're going to be a little slower. But if the bees are out of space, even new beekeepers have to worry. Like if you set them for like 2 months out in your yard, they are going to swarm. So, all right, let's see. So looking back at this hive, if this hive was like 3 or so boxes tall and I pop it open and this is my top box, especially going into the springtime, if these bees overwintered, I would want to check all of the boxes. So one of the things I do in my first spring inspections, which I kind of did a little bit like last month, but you could be doing it now as well, is brood chamber reversals. And I kind of do this more thoughtfully, but in the fall, it might have been that your brood nest was kind of in this bottom area. And then you've got honey supers up top. But during the winter, they tend to, move upward. So that box that's filled with like 9 frames of bees might be up here. And then these boxes might be totally empty. So you've got this huge stack that you don't need a huge stack. So typically what we'll do is take away these boxes and maybe even just take a box as it is and flop it on top. And now they've got more space. So you can just plop a box right on top of them. So let's see. The other kind of indication that they might be out of space, I usually count the frames of bees because some bees build burr comb anyway, but if they've got burr comb filled with honey up top, they can often be just like, we need more space. I find that bees often especially with drone babies. If you're using foundation, these are all sized for worker bees, but drones are a little chunkier and they don't want to, like, it's hard to stuff a drone in here. So they will make burr comb on the tops and bottoms of frames pretty much no matter what and put drones in there because they want to build a slightly larger cell. Oh yeah, burr comb, this stuff. Burr comb is any comb is somewhere I don't want it. So that's what I define it as. Is like, I want them to make my nice beekeeping file cabinet. And if it's not there, it's burr comb. So, which they often like to do. Yes. If it is going to squish bees, like I kind of started out very meticulous. Do you get rid of this stuff? So I started out meticulous. I'm like, there shall be nothing anywhere but where I want it to be. And now I'm like, if it's going to murder bees, I will remove it. So if I'm putting it back together and I'm going to squish a whole bunch of bees, I'll take it off. But if I'm not going to squish a whole bunch of bees, like if I can like smoke them down a little bit, this, if it's filled with honey, like they really don't want to get off it. And sometimes I'm like, well, I'll eat that so I can scrape it off. So that's my kind of delineating factor is, am I going to squish bees by putting it back? If yes, remove. If no, put it back. So yeah. So if this is used to make drones, should I leave it? Oftentimes when I'm inspecting, if I'm opening the boxes, I've cracked open the drone cells. So those are going to be removed no matter what. So they're not going to be salvageable. So ultimately, no. So you could scrape those up. Chickens love drones. So you could scrape it off, feed it to your chickens, or you can leave it and the bees will clean it right up. So all right. So let's see. So just showing kind of what's in there of like this full box. So the box that I was showing kind of had some food, usually on the edges, has the babies concentrated near the center. So capped brood, open brood, eggs, usually kind of tending a little more capped brood than open brood. So just based on how many days they are in each state. So then the other thing, I want to check for resources, which again, oops, back here. This actually, so this is some of the older bee bread. You can see it's kind of dull and shinier, but it is still usable for them. This is like an ideal frame where you've got brood in the center, you have a little ring of bee bread, and then you've got nectar. So a lot of those brood frames might have food like this. If they are just brood and empty, on the corners, you want to make sure at least on the edges of the brood nest that you're seeing some food. By this point, they should be able to bring it in. You can supplement, but typically in like this region, I'm supplementing in the fall, and you shouldn't have to supplement hives now. So you should be seeing this. Yeah. Oh yeah, I probably, I flip things all over the place. Oh yeah, so yeah, exactly. So it is upside down. So usually when I see those like nice curves, like the bulk of the honey is in the top corner rather than the bottom corner. So, but that is kind of, you'll usually see that ring. So in checking for health, if you've overwintered bees, I don't know with like other folks who've opened their hives, but I have had a miserable time with mites last year, just treating them like crazy. My levels were very high, no matter, I treated formic, hopguard, etc. So some of my hives coming through that I've checked, I've seen mites and deformed wing virus now. So, which I'm waiting for the weather to be proper to kind of treat them again, or splitting can actually be kind of a form of treatment if they're healthy enough to take it. But in general, the health that I want to keep a lookout for throughout the year, this is usually what I like to see. This beautiful, nice pattern. There's a few little holes here and there, but it's not spotty, so it's not that checkerboard pattern. This is beautiful. And this might be also what I find in this time of year if hives have like moved away from stuff, is that I've got all this old gross stuff. Here's a wax moth right here with these webs. So you might be starting to see stuff like this. If this came from a weak hive, if I know what killed that hive, which is usually mites, but I will share this stuff. If there's a very strong hive, they will actually clean this right up. You've got drawn comb. But in general, removing this and putting it through a freezer, if you can. This is like, I had my chest bee freezer, which can fit, I think, 2 medium hive bodies in it at once. Freezing it for 48 hours kills the eggs and the wax moths that are in there. And then you could probably pop it back on a hive at some point when they're large enough to clean it for you. But this is a sign of pests and a sign that there's too much space in your hive because the pests have moved in and the bees haven't kicked them out. Then let's see. This is from a screened bottom board. I should probably get a better picture of this, but this little red shiny thing here, there's a bunch of little red shiny things. There's mites on the bottom boards. And there's also a beetle, which you might see around honey that is not being well patrolled. So those are some of the other pests you might be seeing. So if you have a screened bottom board, you can check out what's on there. If you're seeing mites on your bees, that's usually a very bad sign. By the time you are seeing them, there's a lot of mites. So typically with a brand new beekeeper who has started with a package, this is kind of more of a early summer to fall problem that you'll be dealing with and not spring. But if you've overwintered hives, mites are an all year problem at this point. So it's not just like, oh, treat them in the fall, like a lot of bee books say. It's an all year problem. Always be looking for mites. Oh, that's about the size of a hive beetle right there. You can see this worker bee abdomen versus hive beetles. So they don't even take up a full cell and they're pretty quick, but you can usually see them, this little thing skittering around. And then for the mites, typically you're not going to see the mite itself because, again, by the time it's on the back of the bee, you have a lot of mites. You will maybe start to see earlier on bees that don't look so hot. So this is a deformed wing virus bees. There's like 20 different viruses that a mite can carry. So you might see stuff like that. Again, as a brand new beekeeper, you might not see this, but this is something to really get familiar with, certainly by like July. So you definitely want to know how to identify mites, check for mites. I'm sure this guild will do a talk about mites at some point. So I'll move into some swarm prevention then. So for swarm prevention, there's kind of some stages of intervention that you go through, which is preventative. Oh my God, fix it right now. Or I am way too late. So this is like a preventative stage. If my bees are looking healthy, beautiful, those gorgeous frames, this is the preventative stage. Like I could split my hive from one big beehive into 2 beehives, kind of at any point, as long as there's enough bees. This is what, oh my God, fix it now looks like. These are queen cells. They're open right now at the bottom. These ones are capped. That means a queen is coming out in a few days. So she is almost here. So this is like, if you open your hive and see this, fix it now. And then, oh wait, okay. All right, I'll do questions now. Yes. I usually do. So should we just pinch the queen cups if we see queen cups and a lot of good eggs? There's a difference between a queen cell and a queen cup. So a queen cup looks like the top of an acorn, maybe pointed down on the bottom of your frames. So it's kind of got this little like globy shape. These are clearly elongated. So they're kind of more of that peanut shape. These, like, they are raising queens. I've noticed like in the spring, you get an uptick of queen cups. And I actually do knock them down just so that the next time I'm in there, I'm like, okay, they built more. And it just has me keep track of, rather than they've built a bunch over here and a bunch over there. So I can kind of keep track of how many queen cups. So I typically knock them down, but they are not necessarily something to worry about until they start getting elongated. But I kind of take it as like the preventative stage is if they're building a lot of cups, they're kind of like thinking like, we're going to be ready when we're ready to swarm. So I'd still say that's preventative phase. So I knock them down. So, oh yes, and then your question. Well, this. So preventing a swarm, one, you lose all your bees. So, or not all of them, but half of them. So this kind of shoots you in the foot for honey production. So at the very least, looking at your outlook. So you've lost half your bees. They gorged on honey before they left. So they've taken a lot of resources, and now your bees are smaller and they have to build up again. From a community responsibility standpoint, like you're throwing bees into the neighborhood. Like at a minimum, they're going to end up in somebody's tree. Too bad, so sad. At a maximum, they're going to end up in somebody's walls and cost thousands of dollars to remove. So it's really not the responsible thing to let your bees swarm. It's also how laws get passed to restrict beekeeping. So if you want to keep beekeeping legally, we should beekeep responsibly. So it's important to prevent swarms, just to not be a complete nuisance in our neighborhood. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So to prevent a swarm, would you put another hive in your backyard? Yes. Like I'd say if they get to this stage, the odds of them just going next door is very low. Like they usually are like, we're going to go get other resources. We're going away. So like in areas where I get like inconvenient swarms, I do try to trap them, but they always go to the tree instead of my bait box. So just putting an empty box there is not adequate swarm prevention. So I'll talk about some adequate swarm prevention in just a sec. So this is the you are too late stage, the beginning of the you are too late stage. They've already left. If you're lucky, they will land somewhere where you can catch them and put them in a box. In which case, if you catch them at this point and they've balled up somewhere and you shake them in a box, I have successfully gotten them to stay in the same bee yard, so in the same backyard at that point. If they've been sitting in a tree for a while and you put them in the same bee yard, they may have already picked their same location. You might get them in the box and then they'll leave tomorrow and go to the next spot. So it's hit and miss. If you can take them further away where they don't know the neighborhood, that is usually better, but it's a tricky situation for a lot of us backyard beekeepers that have one backyard. So let's see. This is also the too late phase. So if you missed the swarm, which unless you work from home, it's unlikely that you'll catch them. They like the witching hour is kind of that like maybe noon to 4 time period is when they really like to go. So if you come back in and do an inspection and you see, oh, this one got opened like a nice little can opener at the bottom, this queen made it. And then she went next door and like stung all of her sisters. So they got opened on the side and the worker bees removed them because she was like, I'm the queen. And then sting, 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 sting. This one might have made it, but it's kind of opened on the side. So maybe not. So this is too late. You've missed it. The queen is gone. So let's try to get it in the preventative stage. And that's why inspecting every 2 weeks in the spring is really important because you will, if you wait a month, you will come in and see those broken down queen cells. Like they've already gone. So in terms of prevention, like this is what you might see. So like I actually don't even see queen cups on this one. There is some burr comb along the bottom, but none of those little like acorn top looking cups. So I could force split them now if it was convenient for me. Usually when I'm splitting, I am waiting for like a nice long stretch of good weather, which I don't see in our current forecast. So I'm probably going to be waiting a little bit. So you might also see some of the precursors they don't really want to swarm until there's drones, but this is already started up here. The strong hives are producing drones already. So we're kind of like in it. So if there's just these flat, you can kind of see this is drone brood here, and then this is worker brood. So drone brood in foundation looks like popcorn. They're kind of like bulged out, whereas the worker brood is flat. So that's how you can tell the difference when they're still in the pupa phase. And then of course, like these cool dudes start showing up with their big eyes. So the phase that I'm working in now, because I don't want to do a split because I'm worried there's too much rain, the queens aren't going to be able to get out. So I might ruin my splits because they can't adequately mate. So I'm going to try to open the brood nest and make sure they have enough space. So this big hive that we were looking at before, it's got 10 nice frames. So if they're looking pretty strong, especially if they have 2 boxes deep of this stuff, I'm going to take this box. And one option that a lot of people do, like, I'm just going to give them space, is you flop a box of foundation on top. That could work. If you have drawn comb, they're more likely to move upstairs straight away. But what I prefer to do is to take out 2 frames of the capped brood, move them up into the center. So if you've got only foundation, this not only kind of draws them upstairs. I heard a beekeeper in this club long ago reference this. If I just like plopped a second story on your house, you'd be like, whatever. But if I moved your TV and your fridge upstairs, you're going to go up there. So this is like, they have a vested interest in doing this. Around this time of year, I'm making sure to move capped brood up, mostly because they're a little more hardy for temperature changes. And I'm putting just a few of them upstairs. I always like to move 2 frames at the same time because it kind of makes it a little easier for the bees to cluster around them and keep them warm. Open brood is a little more fragile and sensitive to the temperatures. So that's why at this time, I'm keeping them downstairs. In June with bigger hives, move whatever you want up there. But this is the safest course for right now. Yeah. I'd say if they are big enough to be doing something like that. Oh, so what if it has a whole mix of things? What if they're not textbook perfect like you've described here, Kendall, which is very often the case. They're never this perfect. But I would say if they are big enough to be doing something like this, you should be able to find 2 frames of capped. So, and if you can't, maybe they're a little weaker, or you could wait, or you could just add space on top. But you should be able to find 2 pretty good capped frames without all 3 stages. So I've left behind in this scenario. So here I've added a foundation frame here, 2 frames of brood, and another foundation. So in general, the kind of pattern is like brood, brood, empty, brood, brood, empty, brood, brood. So you're kind of sticking that empty space right in the center to be like, hey, look, there's still space in your brood nest. You are not out of space. So that's the signal you're trying to send to your queen right now. So that is my swarm prevention technique for right now. And depending on where exactly you are, how much heat you get during the day, I'm kind of on the fence of like with a 10 frame hive, whether I do this to them right now, just because it is still getting very cold in many areas of the Bay Area. And if it's a slightly weaker hive, I don't want to make it too hard for them to heat all of the babies. But this is kind of the best setup that you can give them to still keep the brood centered, having these brood frames right in the center, and then it'll be right on top of them so that they can still keep everybody warm. So let's see. So in terms of splitting the hive, you're looking at your bee development stages here. So you want to be conscious of all of this. Typically, if they are right, it's very hard to notice this, but if they themselves are kind of preparing to swarm, they actually stop feeding the queen quite as much. She needs to, like, she gets put on a diet and an exercise program. So they actually nip at her a little bit and feed her less so she can lose weight in order to fly. So they need to prep the queen. So in this delicate little stage, you actually see a slight tip in capped brood. So you'll see an increase in the amount of capped brood compared to open brood. But it is, again, a very difficult ratio to notice. So like I find that I have a hard time noticing that. But with a box like this, I'd say if I have at least 8 frames, I usually want 2 boxes that look like this. So I kind of want 16 frames of brood before I'm considering making a split. I think it's a very aggressive split to split 1 box. So because you don't want to shoot both of them in the foot. You don't want to make them too small. So I think a split of 1 box could live, but you really want to set them up for success. So I would want like 16 frames of brood before I split personally. So if I've got 2 boxes that look like this, oh, and that's what the ratio might change to be. You might see a little more capped brood. But if I've got my original hive and my split, if I'm doing this for swarm prevention, I'm the swarm. So I need to take the queen and move her away. So it's actually really important that you find the queen in this. This is the only circumstance where I'm like, find the queen, especially if you're doing it for swarm prevention, because she has to go. So that's the most effective swarm technique. So some techniques for finding her, if you have a really hard time finding her, is get an empty box and check every single frame. So check it really carefully. And when you're done, don't put it back in the same box, put it in the new box. And that way she can't walk back to where she's already been. So that's the best way I find. If you still can't do it, get in the Bee Buddy program, find somebody to help you out. It is possible. I have gone through hives sometimes 3 times looking for some queen, but you can do it. I believe in you. Yeah, Peter. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So if a new beekeeper gets their bees in April, at what point do they have to start worrying about swarms? Next year, probably. If you are diligent in looking, I would say next year probably. But if you are I installed my package and I didn't open it till June, I would say June is when you need to start worrying. So because then they're going to fill up all that foundation in a few weeks, they're going to fill up all that space, and then within the 2 to 3 month mark, if you are really not giving them any space, they will swarm. But in general, if you are at least checking them every 2 to 3 weeks as a new beekeeper, they probably shouldn't swarm. And as a new beekeeper, you probably won't split this year, because by the time your bees are strong enough to split, we're going to be going into summer. It's going to start being dearth. You're going to shoot yourself in the foot for even any hope, glimpse of honey that you might have gotten, which is not also a guarantee for first year beekeeping. But this is a really good thing that even if this is like, whoa, there's a lot of information, it's really good to have it in your mind for if your bees make it through the winter, to be prepared to do this, to at least be like, oh yeah, that lady said I should split my bees. Let me think about that, or at least Google it. So yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's for swarming or splitting. So a swarm does interrupt the mite cycle, splitting does too. So that's why I like one of my mechanical treatments. So I consider this a treatment for mites the way that I do it. So this is your spring treatment is mechanical. And then my summer treatment is usually chemical. So I'm doing like a formic acid or something, but I count this as my spring treatment if I split them. If you see a lot of drone brood, should I destroy them? I typically don't. Like, there is another kind of more mechanical or behavioral method of mite control is drone culling, which I think there's some mixed feelings about that, because like one, you could be cultivating drones where you put in some special drone foundation. If you miss your window and let all those drones hatch out, that's no good. So like I typically, if they are naturally building drones, I just let them go for it. So yeah, Allah. So why does Apis cerana not not dying from the mites? They have a slightly shorter brood cycle. So Apis cerana is the Asian honeybee. And so the Asian honeybee co-evolved with varroa mites. So they have existed with them. They're a slightly smaller bee, and they actually have a brood cycle that is 1 day shorter. And it makes all the difference for mite production. So, well, this is my understanding of it. Yeah. Interesting. Mm-hmm. It can't. Well, because in Apis cerana, a varroa mite is unable to reproduce in a worker bee cell. In our honeybee, the Italian honeybees, European honeybees, mites can produce one viable female from a worker brood. So that's why they are reproducing in our worker cells. They are not reproducing in Apis cerana worker cells. In drone cells, they can provide, here in our Italian bees, can produce 3 viable females per drone. So drones are like super bombing our hives with mites. So that's why a lot of people do cull the drones, is because more mites can be produced in drone cells. So culling drones is one way to keep that under control. But I do try to, in general, like do mite checks and do some form of treatment. So if you have done a mite check and there are lots of mites visible, you might consider doing drone culling. But in the spring, I generally just let them go for it. So yeah, no. Oh, mite uncapping. Oh, that's so with the varroa sensitive hygiene, they're supposed to be able to smell larva that is sick or diseased, because these mites in their development cycle are feeding on the larva and injecting diseases as they're going. So a varroa sensitive hygiene. So if you see VSH, that is usually bees that have been designed to, like, they're like, oh, something's wrong with this larva, and they uncap a lot more. So your brood pattern might not actually be quite as solid, and this could be from a hygienic strain of the bees. Ah, okay. And Serrana is supposed to be better at uncapping. Yeah. Okay, sorry. And now I'm talking about mites, because I'll talk about mites. Yeah, okay. Okay. Yes. So let me. Yes. Okay, and I'll get to that. Yes. So I'll talk about that in a moment. So we'll finish Tim and then I'll go to that. Yes. Yes. So marking queens, should I do that? My vote is 100% yes. I live in San Diego County. I am legally obligated to mark my queens so that I know that they are a docile subspecies and not the Africanized bees that live in Southern California. So in theory, someone might come inspect me. I don't know who's enforcing this, but I mark all of my bees so that I know who that queen is. So for me, it's very important. For you, I think it's all like also very important, because 1, you're going to see her more easily. 2, it tells you information about your hive. If you have come in so late that you can't see those broken down queen cells, if you see a queen without a mark, they swarmed. They made a new queen, they superseded, they did something. So I highly recommend marking your queens. I'm a wuss with marking queens. So I use the one-handed queen catcher. It's really nice in that it's like a little like catching a spider with a cup and a piece of paper. It kind of like one-handed scoops her up, and then she's already in this little push pop that you can push her up to the top and mark her with a pen. So it's really one of the easiest ways you can do it. The Master Beekeeper program has you practice on drones. So you pick up the ones that don't sting you with your fingers and then mark them by yourself. But for me, even I'm still squeamish after 13 years of beekeeping. I feel like I'm like, I'm going to squish you. So the one-handed queen catcher is my thing. Exactly. Yeah. So if you're marking the drones, you kind of like, so you might want to like, yeah, but it lets you know what like pressure they can take, etc. So, because you don't want to touch a queen on the abdomen, because that's going to probably render her sterile, like injure her a little bit. So that's the way to practice. But I'd say beginners start with the one-handed queen catcher. It's a lot easier, very beginner friendly. A marking pen, which I usually get from the beekeeping stores. You can get it from Peninsula Feed. You can get them from Amazon, but for me, I feel like they rub off a lot easier. So I prefer to get them from the beekeeping suppliers, but it's usually a water-based pen. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And then there's colors. So that's how I know I've seen a 3-year-old queen is by what colors they're marked. So I usually Google every year. I'm gonna have to ask Google for this year. I think last year I think it's green. I hate green. So green. I'm gonna go I think Elizabeth had some like really sweet bright colors that she got from an art store instead of the beekeeping store. Cause I feel like the green almost like if it's too dark, it looks like their thorax anyway. It's kind of a bummer. So go to the art store and get a nice like Posca pen. But that's what you're usually marking them with is Posca pens. So, all right, I'm gonna derail back or re-rail back to this of okay, like I'm taking this queen out. Can I move swarm cells? So let me start with like I am the swarm. I didn't see swarm cells. I'm gonna swarm this hive. So I'm splitting it. I'm finding my queen and I'm putting her in the split. She is here. So whatever frame she exists on, if you don't want to catch her, just move that frame on over. So she goes there. Then I am moving open brood, like the big fat open brood. I want open mouths to come with the queen because I want to get them out of the original hive. Because the original hive is going to flip out and be like, oh my God, she's gone. And they're going to pick a few bees to stuff full of royal jelly. And they're going to let a lot of the other brood starve because they are like, we are shutting down anything that's not necessary. The most necessary thing is making our queen. So there's actually some pretty high brood mortality when you split. So I try to move open mouths also because even if there wasn't brood mortality, I don't want competition for my queen. I want my queen getting all the love and attention. So we leave the capped brood over here. And then also like if there's mites, they're hopefully in this capped brood. If I've got the younger open brood over here, hopefully they haven't hopped in over there yet. So because I'm trying to like leave mites behind where these guys aren't going to have a queen. It's going to take them at least a month to really have a laying queen. So that is the mite treatment over here. And then these guys get more of a fresh start over here. So then I want to make sure I'm moving some food over. I try to do kind of an even split with the food. So everybody's got a little bit of food. So half the food comes over to the split. Some stays here. If you're doing this all in your backyard, you might like, great, I'm done. You're not done. Take some frames over here and shake them. Or like if you're doing splits, you probably want to be gentle. Take a little brush and brush them in. But you need to move more bees to the split because any bee who has seen the outside world is coming back to the original hive location. So they're all going to drift back, or I still shake a few frames of bees into my splits just to make sure there's a good amount of bees. You can take that box and move it to another bee yard if you have it, but definitely err on the side of trying to put a lot of bees into the new hive. I think there is kind of a mix. You want to make sure there's enough young workers over here to feed queens because they are the ones that are producing the royal jelly. But you're going to lose a lot of bees out of the split that just come back to the original hive location. So that, and then I kind of squish everybody all back together. I leave the original hive with a frame of eggs. That should be the only open mouths, or if they've like just hatched, they should be the same size as an egg sitting in a little pool of royal jelly. You want very few open mouths right here. That's where your queens are going to be. So that's how I do a split for swarm prevention, is that way. Let folks take pictures. Then there's kind of this calendar. So like, okay, when should I open that original hive again? So you can keep inspecting the split hive with the queen in it as normal. Like they're a hive now. They're good to go. But the original hive, so this is kind of my split calendar, is like day 1, you create the split, it's got eggs. By day 4, no more eggs. Your queen cells should be developing. Depending on how many frames of eggs were left behind, how big your splits are, you might want to go in on day 4 and cull. So that means like knock down if there are too many. Usually I don't see, like if I'm doing just 5 frames of a split, usually they don't go crazy. But if you've got a bigger hive, they might make 20 queen cells all in there because they're like, we're going to make that queen. that hive's going to swarm at the end of this because more than one queen is going to emerge and they're going to be like, oh, no problem, sister. We won't fight. And then they'll split if they have enough resources. But because queens want unfair fights. So they want queen cells that are like right next to them. And then the first one comes out and then she's like, aha, she chews a little hole and she stings her sister while her hands are tied behind her back. So that's how she wants to fight. So I let them fight that way. I usually cull my queen cells down to one frame and they're bunched all together. So that's how I usually do it to prevent like a secondary swarm off of this. Then by day 6, so then I don't touch it. Past that, like leave it alone. This is what's happening on the inside. Is day 16 is really the last possible day for a queen to emerge. Then she spends about 1 week like hardening her body. So even after she comes out of her cocoon, her body's still hardening. And then she might start going on mating flights kind of early that next week. So I usually wait until 1 month afterwards, so about day 34, to open it up and look for eggs. If I don't see eggs at that point, sometimes I'll be like, I'll give you guys another week. Maybe I just missed it. At that point, if you don't see eggs, you could put a frame of eggs in from another colony. So from that original hive, you could go take some eggs, put them back just to be like, I don't know if they're there. And then if you open it maybe a week later, if you see queen cells, it didn't work out and they're trying again. If they raised it into worker brood and you see more frames of brood, success, you win. I'd say the first time I did this, the bees succeeded despite my efforts. So they really, it's their best interest to raise a queen. So they are going to try their very hardest, no matter how you do it. So even if you're like, I did it wrong, like they are trying to live. So they're going to try to do it. So, but that's the gist of how I do that. So let's see. If you're in the, oh my God, fix it now stage, you're like already at day 10 here in this cycle. So you're going to have to do something immediately. Like don't close up that hive, go get your extra equipment and fix it right now. So when I'm doing something like that, let's see. You can move, I actually usually do still move the queen because if they are making queen cells and you've taken away the queen cells, she might swarm anyway because she's still in the same hive. So I actually still move the queen in this case. So you find her, do it, you can, and move her over. And then I do try to move eggs, open brood with her. And then I leave the queen cells. So in queen cells, they often are near open brood, but they've already started feeding that queen. So just leave some of the queen cells, cull the extras, make it 1 frame of queen cells, and then you're good to go. If you've got a really large hive, if you've got at least 3 boxes of brood, make more splits. I've made 6 splits off of a single hive when there's queen cells present. So it's not, you can just make sure they all have nectar, bee bread. They've got at least like 2 frames of brood for them with that extra queen cell, and shake some bees into them, and that'll work. If the weather has started getting warm, so like in April, May, then it should still work out. So you can make more than 1 split off of this. Let's see, but I can't find the queen. So educated walkaway split. So if you want to split anyway, you're like, Kendal, I just can't do it. She's not in here. So I would say do a completely even split. Try to split them in half. I call this the educated walkaway split because a true walkaway split is like you've got 2 boxes, take the top box, plop it on the ground, walk away. Like that's dumb. Don't do that. So the educated walkaway split is take your 2 boxes. I have no idea where my queen is. Put half the stuff in 1 box, half the stuff. You're splitting the brood evenly, the food evenly, everything evenly. Still do your shakes into the new split so that they have enough bees that stick around to raise brood. Come back 4 days later, and if you mark, like take your marking pen and mark, all my frames are all marked up with weird letters and symbols that I all have, but mark where your eggs are or your young open brood and check those frames in 4 days. One of these hives will have queen cells. One of them will just be business as usual. That's where your queen is. That's where she is. Well, if you're in the, so just look where the pollen is. Yes and no, because if you're doing the split in the same yard, all of the foragers, no matter what, have returned to the original hive. So even if your queen is in the new box, pollen won't be coming in. So maybe pollen won't be coming in either hive if they're doing that. But I'd say it's a little trickier that way, especially if you're working in the same yard, because you'll be like, ah, my new split, I've killed it. Entrance activity will likely be very low because every forager who has seen the outside world is like, that's not my house, went back to the original hive. So it is okay if your new hive has, that's why you're shaking those extra bees and making sure you moved food, because they have lost their foragers, but they should get new foragers within like a week. So because those young bees that have been shaken in there, some of them will be on the older end and they'll be going out because they will realize, ah, I need food, and they'll get out there. Yeah. Mm. Oh, so you can hear the difference between which brood box doesn't have the queen, depending on how spicy your bees are. I found like with my Italians, they're pretty quiet, but after a few days, bees that are not queen right, so the bees that are like stressed out a little bit, they definitely have a higher pitch to them. So if you're listening to your bees, like I can at this point like open hives and be like, oh, something like queen's not in here, because they're immediately like, mm-hmm. I find like some of these Italian bees, they're just like, leave me open for hours, Kendall. I'm fine. So, and then in Southern California, any hive you open, they're like right on your face immediately. So, let's see. I think that is the gist of what I was trying to do. So, a little later, but yeah. So I think I answered a lot of questions throughout, but is there anything still? And I think I answered that one question about what to do with the queen cells in the chat. Anything else from the chat? All right. And then from Allah. Have I ever tried to place the queen in a cage? Yes. I've only actually done it with some Africanized bees and they hate it. Oh, just to prevent swarm? Yes, actually. So because the vast majority of my hives are observation hives, the type of observation hive I use is an Ulster hive, which is basically just a nuke with a queen excluder on top of it and then a single frame upstairs. And I put my queen upstairs so the kids can see it. This actually prevents swarms. So I've seen my observation hive swarm before, and then they come immediately back because the queen is still upstairs. If the queen didn't go with them, they're not going. So I've seen them actually raise a queen upstairs. And then if the old queen, if they like the old queen and she can't leave, they actually just murder the new queen. They're like, sorry, we didn't need you after all. Our bad. So I've seen some people do that. Like, I think I wouldn't do that on a real, like a traditional hive. Like I've seen some people put the queen excluder above the bottom board. And then that way, oh, she can't get out. But it does restrict movement in and out of the hive. So I probably wouldn't do it on a big hive, but caging the queen can work. It can also work if you don't want to split, but you want to have that brood break. You can do, I would recommend more of a push-in cage. So she has a little bit of space to move, which is basically just some, I think, number 8 hardware cloth. And you bend the sides a little bit so that when you poke it into the mesh, the bees can kind of run around in the middle there. So you can cage her in an area and that creates that brood break. You can try to stuff her into a little cage, but it's trickier to do. And it does kind of prevent her from laying anything at all and moving around. And I think it can affect the quality of your queen in the long run. Thank you. I'd say hire a beekeeper to split your hives. Like I'm too lazy to do this. Yeah, like I think they will. Like they'll swarm themselves to death or they might survive, but ultimately with the state we are with varroa mites, if you are not actively keeping your bees and monitoring your bees, it's not like with my indoor cat. With my indoor cat, if I don't vaccinate her, she is not in contact with any other cats ever. But if I've got my bees can forage up to 5 miles from my house. If my bees are sick, I'm like, too bad, so sad. My bees are sick. Well, Kendal's healthy bees that are just a little bit away, they're foraging. They find your hive that's dying and then robs it out and brings all these viruses and mites back to our hive. So ultimately, it's like if you're lazy, like this might not actually be the hobby for you, or get some help when you are feeling like overwhelmed. Like if you still love those bees, get some help from another beekeeper. There are plenty of beekeepers here that do beekeeping as a service that can come and check your hives, because it is really important that you take care of them, because it doesn't just impact you, it impacts our beekeeping community here. Yeah, nobody splits the bee. They kind of split themselves. They do. Bees that live in the trees, they'll split themselves, but they do, like, they have a buildup of viruses that are there. So I know in San Diego County, we've kind of convinced the city that it's ultimately bad for native bees, especially in a lot of our state parks. And so we're doing removals when we can. As best we can, because it's like especially in Africanized territory, we're like, we don't want random bees and trees near hiking trails because they will chase you hundreds of yards if you get the wrong strain of spicy bee. So that's what we're doing, and we ultimately think that's better for our native bees. So up here, it's not as much of a, it's like, oh, it's a nuisance to have bees in a tree as opposed to like a literal danger. So yeah, so they're not splitting, but they're also probably dying at a higher rate. Anything else? Cool. Well, thank you for having me. It's good to be back in the Bay Area. Such a pleasure to keep bees up here compared to Southern California. Thank you all so much.